The message arrived like a forbidden whisper in the early hours. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, illuminating the darkness of the room with that cold, uncomfortable light. I found the timing strange. Who would text me at 11:30 at night? When I saw my daughter's name on the screen, my heart softened for a moment. I thought maybe she needed me. Maybe she had remembered that I exist for something beyond cooking on Sundays and babysitting my grandson. I pressed the audio button, expecting to hear a "Mom, forgive me," or any words that would make sense of my constant insomnia. But no. As soon as her voice filled the room, I realized those words weren't meant for me. It was a tone I hadn't heard in a long time, sweet, intimate, as if each syllable was meant for someone she wanted to please. The someone, I discovered seconds later, was her husband. A dialogue that should never have reached my ears. I gripped the phone tightly, as if it might slip from my hand at any moment, and turned up the volume. With each word, a chill ran up my spine. She was talking about me. Not the way a daughter talks about her mother, but as if I were an unbearable burden that needed to be discarded. The cruelest part was noticing the background of the recording. A muffled laugh, masculine, accompanying her words, agreeing, encouraging. It was my son-in-law's voice, the same one who always greeted me with rehearsed politeness, but never looked me in the eyes for more than 2 seconds. The same one who had already commented, laughing, that I had maid's hands, because they were always rough from work. There, in the silence of my room, I realized that phrase that hurt me years ago wasn't just an unfortunate joke. It was part of something bigger. A deep contempt that now revealed itself without disguise. My breathing became short, my chest heavy as if I were about to faint. Still, I couldn't stop listening. It was like standing before an abyss and even knowing the danger, not being able to resist the temptation to look down. Each replay of the audio opened new wounds. I had already endured sideways glances, denied invitations, giggles in the hallways at family parties. But hearing my own daughter talk about me that way, it was a wound no mother should carry. And then came the final blow, the phrase that made me freeze to my fingertips. She mentioned my name in a tone loaded with contempt, as if I were a thing and not a person. In that moment, I understood that message wasn't just a mistake. It was a cruel revelation, a broken mirror showing who was really by my side. What remained to discover was how far this plan whispered in darkness would go. I am a 62-year-old woman, and I carry on my face the marks of someone who faced life with courage. I grew up hearing my mother say that being black meant having to prove our worth twice as much. And I proved it. I worked as a seamstress, cook, caregiver. I did everything so my daughter could have access to everything that was denied to me. Books, courses, designer clothes when she asked. I told myself that each extra hour, each sleepless night, would be rewarded by seeing my girl smile. But life has a cruel way of showing us that love isn't always enough to be recognized. Within my own home, I learned to be invisible. At every birthday, I sat in the corner of the table, hearing compliments directed at the son-in-law, the neighbor's daughter-in-law, the family friend, but almost never to me. My daughter rarely introduced me with pride. I was always the mom who helps, or the grandma who takes care of things. Never the woman who overcame poverty, who supported a home alone, who transformed pain into strength. My son-in-law, then, always carried that polite smile, but filled with irony. He looked at my simple clothes and said, in an apparently innocent tone, "Someday we'll take you shopping to modernize a little." People laughed, I forced a smile, but inside I felt the ground opening up. And the truth is, I kept accepting it. Like so many women, I stayed quiet. I stayed quiet when my daughter said I took up too much space in the house. I stayed quiet when my grandchildren repeated phrases that clearly didn't come from them, but from their parents. I stayed quiet because I believed this silence was the price of peace, and that a mother should always understand. But that audio shed light on everything. It wasn't carelessness. It wasn't just impatience. It was a project, a plan against me. That night, while the sound of their laughter still echoed in my ears, I realized I had reached my limit. I could no longer hide behind the role of submissive mother, the grandmother who accepts any crumb of affection. They didn't know it, but that message sent by mistake wasn't just a slip. It was the password that would give me access to the darkest secret they hid. And if you who hear me now have ever felt the weight of being invisible within your own family, you know what I'm talking about. You know how it hurts to carry love in your chest and receive only contempt in return. That's why I want you to walk with me to the end of this story. Subscribe here and don't let go of my hand, because this fight isn't just mine, it belongs to all of us who have been silenced. I still didn't know how far their cruelty went. But what I heard in the second part of that audio would show that my daughter and her husband weren't just tired of my presence. They had something else planned. Something much worse. Listening to that audio was like tearing a veil that covered reality. In the first part, there was already enough pain to shatter me. But it was in the continuation that I realized how deep was the abyss into which my own daughter was pushing me. She wasn't just talking about tiredness or wanting space. She was talking about me as if I were disposable baggage, a financial problem that needed to be resolved urgently. The old lady's lot is worth much more than she thinks, her voice said, clear, calculated. And her husband's muffled laugh came right after, agreeing. If we can get the signature before the end of the year, we close the deal and we're set. My whole body shivered. They were talking about the inheritance still in my hands. They were talking about the piece of land my father, a simple man, left me as proof that I also deserved dignity. These weren't just words thrown to the wind. It was an architected plan. My daughter, the one I carried in my arms, whom I warmed with the heat of my chest when fever burned her, now spoke of me as if I were a stone in the path of her dreams of wealth. And my son-in-law, with that always polite way in public, showed his true face in private. A man willing to steal, manipulate, and push me out of my own story. I gripped the phone so tightly my hands hurt. I replayed the audio several times, trying to convince myself that maybe I had misunderstood. But no. Each syllable was clear, each laugh was cruel. They were planning to make me sign something. Document. A sale that didn't exist in my will, only in their ambition. For a moment, despair dominated me. I thought about confronting, crying, asking why. But soon reason, the kind born from the depths of pain, took over me. Well, if I rushed, they would close up, hide the evidence, and I would be alone with my word against theirs. I needed more. More evidence, more clarity, more ammunition. It was in that moment that I understood. Their mistake of sending me the audio would be my weapon. What they thought would just be nighttime gossip would become the key to my counterattack. I, the invisible mother, the woman without a voice, now had in my hands the first piece of a puzzle that would bring them to their knees. But there was a pain that corroded me even deeper. If they spoke with such coldness about me, what else would they be capable of doing? How far would their cruelty go? And this question hammered in my mind like an incessant beat, preventing me from sleeping that night, because I sensed the worst was yet to come. I revisited the audio so many times that my daughter's voice seemed engraved on my skin. Only when the repetition dove into silence did I notice other background noises. Computer keys, the rustling of papers. This lit the spark of doubt in me. What if that wasn't just idle talk, but part of a well-documented plan? I got up, walked through the house like someone searching through memories, and one thing led to another. I remembered when my son-in-law called me to help with some signatures at the bank, a few weeks ago. I went, confident and proud to still be useful. He held my hand, spoke with a sweet voice, and placed a paper in front of me. I signed without reading properly because I trusted. I always trusted too much. Now, with the audio playing like an accusation, that memory smelled like a trap. I went back to the room and began rummaging through drawers, old envelopes, account books I've kept since my husband died. Each paper seemed to have something to say. It was in a yellowed folder at the bottom of the closet that I found something that made my stomach turn. There was a copy of my identity document carefully cut out, and next to it, a draft contract with a signature I would recognize among thousands. Mine, uneven and shaky, as it always was because of rheumatism in my joints. The letters looked identical to mine. My body froze. My mind made the journey I didn't want it to make. What if someone had forged my signature? What if, without my knowledge, my name was already linked to a sale? I went deeper. On the old phone I only use for random photos, I found old messages. Some between my son-in-law and a real estate agent I didn't know. They discussed values, deadlines, words that sounded like merchandise. Sell by December. We can't let her suspect. Documents ready. What was once darkness became a map. There were notes from a meeting I had arranged with my lawyer years ago. A meeting where I talked about keeping the land in the family name until my grandchildren could, someday, benefit from it. This now served as a pretext to manipulate it. They transformed my care into justification to remove me from the scene. Anger rose in layers. First a fire of indignation, then a coldness that gave me clarity. I remembered the microaggressions that before seemed like isolated stabs. The daughter-in-law joking that I didn't understand paperwork, the son-in-law interrupting when I spoke with the accountant. Everything was part of a thought-out script. I had been maneuvered, used while they orchestrated the best moment to execute the plan. Not satisfied with words, fate gave me a bitter gift. A receipt dated for a medical appointment in my name, scheduled for a day when I was home alone. The appointment, according to the paper, was for an evaluation of civil capacity. It wasn't just the forged signature that frightened me. There was a clear attempt to forge evidence to declare me incapable of managing my assets. It was the cruel translation of an idea I, deep down, already feared. They didn't just want to remove me, they wanted to erase my voice definitively. When I put it all together, the audio, the messages, the contract draft, the evaluation receipt, I felt something new grow in me. It wasn't just anger, it was a patient determination, sharp as a blade. They had left traces through carelessness. They thought I would stay outside, quiet, as always. They were wrong. I closed the folder carefully, like someone closing a dangerous secret. I knew I needed to act calmly. Rushing would be giving in to emotion and letting them slip through my fingers. I needed a strategy that would transform these papers into irrefutable evidence, into something that couldn't be muffled by excuses or well-rehearsed lies. Before anything else, however, there was a detail that burned me more than all the evidence. During the search, I found a paper with a time and a name, a signature scheduled at the notary's office for the following week, titled Transfer of Ownership. They had set the machine in motion. If I didn't stop it, the next time we sat at the dinner table, my name might already belong to another story. And this urgency left me with a bittersweet sensation that time was my enemy and also my ally, because the less time I had, the more decisive and merciless my next move would have to be. I can't leave anything to chance anymore. The urgency of that notary paper burned like an ember in my hand, and it was this same ember that lit a frightening clarity in me. It wasn't just about proving they had plotted against me. It was about stopping their movement before it was too late. Planning in silence became my new craft. In the days that followed, I maintained my routine like an actress who masters every movement. I cooked, swept, tidied the house with the same precision as always, while behind the calm smile moved a mind that calculated every step. I started with the simplest thing: saving digital copies of everything. I sent the WhatsApp audio to an email only I knew, photographed the papers I found, digitized every draft, every suspicious receipt. I created folders with neutral names, bills, old documents, to throw off any curiosity that might arise. I didn't want the invaders to notice I already knew. I reintroduced myself to the world with caution. I visited the notary's office without them noticing, just to understand deadlines. I talked with my old lawyer, a man of few words, of rare ethics, without showing panic, just asking for general guidance about document security. He noticed in my eyes that something was wrong. He didn't want to force questions, but scheduled a review of my papers and promised to keep copies. Having a silent ally was like gaining a roof on a stormy night. With the small recorder I bought, I began to register. Not out of a desire for espionage, but out of necessity for truth. I took the device with me to lunches, casual meetings with neighbors, sometimes even left it in the living room before going to the market. The conversations I had only intuited before now had a recorded voice, vague phrases about solving the old lady, giggles, dialogues where my son-in-law rehearsed quick answers for eventual questioning. There were audios and excerpts that, isolated, might seem harmless. Together they became proof. Assembling this puzzle required surgical patience. Meanwhile, I also took care of my own public posture. I didn't need to humiliate anyone with scandal. I wanted something deeper. To expose the truth in a way that would remove the veneer of false politeness and lay bare the dirt. I began to note dates, times, who was present at meetings, small details the authors let slip, a cup placed aside, a word said too loudly. Each note was a needle in the fabric of their plan. There were moments of doubt, of course. I felt the weight of the past, the doubt whether anyone would believe me against my own daughter. But I also felt the presence of my ancestors in each choice, women who, without degrees or titles, knew how to read between the lines of betrayal and responded with cunning. I thought of the stories my grandmother told me about how to survive contempt. I thought of the promises I made when I extended my mother's arms. It was time to honor them. I decided then on an extra layer of protection: photos. I photographed the same papers I had already digitized, marked them with a date I found each one, and sent copies to a trusted digital vault, an electronic address I would only use in an emergency and that had a trusted third person as guardian, my old friend Rosa, who never let me down. Rosa had seen my struggle since always. She read the files and didn't say much. She just squeezed my hand and raised her eyebrow, a gesture worth more than 1,000 pieces of advice. In the following days I wrote a letter, not to confront them, but to seal my own inner peace in case something went wrong. It was a record of what had happened, dated and signed, kept together with the documents in the vault. Sometimes, preparation is also a hug a person gives themselves to keep from falling apart. I also planned a detail I consider essential: the stage. I could expose everything at a police station in public on social media, but I wanted control over the moment. It would be at their house, at a dinner where everyone would be gathered, where routine and habitual discomfort would create the perfect atmosphere for truth to sound like a scratched record. I wanted the masks to fall there, in front of neighbors, friends, in that community that had always heard them tell polished versions of who they were. The choice of place was strategic. Public shame corrodes trust like slow fire. And finally, a personal decision. I wouldn't seek revenge out of anger, but justice out of dignity. I wouldn't break lives, but reveal their choices. There was a fine difference between destruction and redemption. I wanted it to be clear in the end that my victory was the demonstration that kindness is not synonymous with weakness. When I put the recorder back in the drawer and turned off the living room lights that night, I felt a mixture of tension and relief. The machinery was in motion, silent, and I was its operator. I still didn't know exactly how it would end, but I knew I wouldn't back down. The notary date was approaching, and with it, the time to choose the tone in which I would make the world hear the truth. As I closed the door, I heard the house breathe. Outside, the street lights seemed colder. Inside me, something warm was growing, the certainty that when truth came to light, no muffled laughter would be enough to silence it. The dinner invitation arrived with the air of celebration. My daughter handed me the folded paper, with large letters announcing a night of good news. Her smile was forced, but her eyes betrayed something more. Impatience, maybe even anticipated triumph. I, however, accepted calmly, like someone who suspects nothing. I kept the invitation in my purse and inside smiled. After all, they were preparing the stage for their own downfall, and I was just confirming my presence at the play I was about to perform. In the following days, my every gesture was measured. I continued moving like the shadow they believed I was, discreet, silent, invisible. I tidied the house, took my walks, visited the market. No one imagined I carried in my chest a secret as heavy as a bomb about to explode. I already had everything I needed: the audio, the forged documents, the recorded conversations. I just lacked the right moment to put the cards on the table. And that moment would be at dinner. I could already visualize the scene: the full room, neighbors, friends, family. My daughter serving expensive wine, my son-in-law speechifying with that rehearsed pomp, as if he were a man of achievements, not a small-souled con artist. They would raise their glasses to toast, confident that everyone there would applaud the announcement of the new house. And then I would change the music. I spent the entire week silently rehearsing every detail. I carefully chose the outfit I would wear. Simple but elegant, a blue dress I bought years ago and never had the courage to wear. I ironed it with care, as if it were armor. I also prepared my speech short, precise. I didn't want to scream or cry. I wanted my words to be sharp blades that would cut without me needing to raise my voice. The night before, I made sure to revisit each piece of evidence. I played the audio again, observing the pauses, the exact moment when my name was spat like poison. I touched the digitized documents, checked if they were saved on the 2 flash drives hidden in different places in the house. I wrote a small note in my own handwriting, explaining the context of everything, and left it with my friend Rosa, who would be my silent witness if something went wrong. That night I barely slept. Dawn found me sitting on the edge of the bed, listening to the sounds of the street and remembering each humiliation I swallowed. The looks that turned away, the jokes about my skin, the whispers when I arrived at parties. I felt the weight of years compressed in my chest, but also a strange lightness. I was finally about to return each wound in the form of truth. The day of the dinner arrived. As I got ready, I noticed my hands weren't shaking. There was a new serenity in me, as if I had crossed through fear and now only determination remained. As I walked to their house, the night wind caressed my face, and I could swear I heard the voices of my ancestors accompanying me, firm, saying, "It's today. Rise up." The house was illuminated, full of people. I heard laughter, the clinking of glasses, soft music in the background. I greeted everyone politely, enduring the surprised looks at seeing me well-dressed, dignified, taking up space without asking permission. I sat at the table, observed every detail, every gesture of my daughter and son-in-law. They seemed to own the world, as if nothing could stop them. And it was precisely at that moment that I realized. The stage was ready. All that remained was for the curtain to open. The dinner proceeded with that artificial atmosphere that only those who have lived through it know how to recognize. Laughter too loud, exaggerated compliments, a parade of appearances. My daughter circulated through the room like the perfect hostess, her light dress highlighting the false purity she wanted to transmit. My son-in-law, with his businessman manner, distributed handshakes, told jokes that drew forced laughs and from time to time cast quick glances at me, like someone monitoring an unwanted burden. I, however, maintained the serenity of someone who already knows the end of the play. The guests settled in, and soon the toasts began. First, banal speeches about friendship, health, and prosperity. Then my daughter cleared her throat, asking for silence. She raised her glass with that air of triumph and announced, "We are very happy because soon we will have the chance to start a new phase with the house of our dreams. All thanks to important decisions we were able to make as a family." That word family cut me inside. Family to them meant only the 2 of them and their son. I, the woman who had supported them in so many moments, was just the stone they were about to remove from the path. The applause from the guests echoed like an insult. But I wasn't shaken. I waited for the euphoria to calm down, let everyone return to their glasses and plates. Then I stood up slowly. The noise of chairs being dragged diminished, and some curious looks turned to me. It wasn't common for me to speak at events like this. I knew that, and it was exactly this detail that would make my gesture even more striking. "Before you finish that toast, I would also like to say a few words," I began in a firm and calm tone. My daughter rolled her eyes, forcing a nervous smile. My son-in-law leaned forward, clearly uncomfortable. I felt the impatience in the air, but I didn't back down. I took my phone from my purse, discreetly connected it to the sound system, which was still on for the ambient music, and pressed play. Suddenly, my daughter's voice filled the environment. Sweet at first, but soon loaded with contempt. "The old lady has lived too long. We need to find a way to get her out of the house." The complicit laughter of her and her husband echoed through the room, crossing the guests like invisible blades. A heavy silence fell. Looks multiplied, some wide-eyed, others full of disapproval. My daughter turned pale, and my son-in-law swallowed hard, trying to hide his panic. With each second, the weight of truth became unbearable for them. And yet I knew. The audio was just the beginning. I had more, much more. If you know someone who has suffered humiliations disguised as jokes or been treated like a burden within their own family, share this story. Often, silence hides deep pain, and sharing can be the key to healing. And, as the recording ended and looks turned to me, I prepared to release the most devastating part of the truth. The last muffled laugh from the audio died in the air, and the silence that followed was almost unbearable. You could hear the sound of silverware being dropped on plates, of breath held in throats. My daughter, who moments before had shone in her light dress with the air of a perfect hostess, was now pale, eyes wide like someone who sees their own image in the mirror and doesn't recognize themselves. My son-in-law, so accustomed to controlling every word, clenched his fists on the table, but his voice wouldn't come out. It was then that I took a thin folder from my purse, which seemed insignificant. I opened it calmly, like someone who's not in a hurry, and spread the papers on the table. There were copies of the forged contract, the receipt from the medical appointment scheduled in my name without me having gone, the emails exchanged with a real estate agent. Each sheet was a stab. Each piece of evidence dismantled the image they tried to build. The guests leaned in to see better, whispering, shaking their heads in disbelief. A neighbor covered her mouth with her hand, shocked. Another guest, a friend of my son-in-law, got up and left hurriedly, unable to maintain eye contact. The shame was now public, irreversible. My daughter tried to speak. "Mom, it's not what it seems." But her own voice broke, drowned in tears and in a lie no one believed anymore. I looked into her eyes, then his, and said in a firm tone, "You planned to erase my history. But you forgot that someone who lived decades of humiliation learns to stay quiet. Only until finding the right time to speak." My voice echoed in the hall, and in that instant I felt the weight of the reversal. It was no longer me who was invisible. It was them, small, exposed, with no way out. The guests became agitated, some asking how they could have done such a thing, others moving away as if the couple carried a contagious disease. The room, which before had been a party scene, transformed into an improvised courtroom. My daughter sobbed, my son-in-law remained silent, his face red with anger and shame. And there, standing before everyone, I realized justice had already been done. But I still kept the final phrase, the one that would forever mark the end of this farce. With each look of disapproval that turned against them, my heart rose higher. The night wasn't over yet, but the sentence had already been pronounced. The entire room seemed to breathe with me. It was as if the air was too heavy for everyone except for me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one who lowered my eyes. My daughter, with her face stained with tears, shrank in her chair like a child caught in mischief, but there was no innocence there. My son-in-law, always so eloquent, remained quiet, trying to force a nervous smile that no longer fooled anyone. I looked around. Neighbors, friends, distant relatives. All witnesses to something that until then only I carried. The weight of loneliness that crushed me inside that house now transformed into collective echo. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. The evidence spoke for itself, and the shame stamped on their faces was the confirmation I was missing. I breathed deeply, took a few steps to the center of the room and said, "I spent my entire life believing that kindness was enough to hold a family together. But today I learned that kindness without respect becomes weakness in the eyes of the ungrateful. And you, my daughter, my son-in-law, chose to confuse love with submission. But here's the truth. I am not a burden, I am a root. And roots cannot be pulled up with lies." A murmur ran among those present. Some nodded silently, others stared at the couple with indignation. I knew those words would be marked. I didn't need to raise my voice. The strength was in the contrast between my calm and their desperation. My daughter tried to get up, maybe to hug me, maybe to justify herself, but her body didn't seem to obey. My son-in-law remained motionless, like someone waiting for the storm to pass on its own. But it wouldn't pass. The truth had been planted and would grow there, in front of everyone. I left the folder with the documents on the table, looked one last time at the guests and concluded, "Those who betray their own mother don't just lose an inheritance. They lose their honor. And honor, ladies and gentlemen, cannot be bought with a new house or dirty money." A dense silence settled, and in that silence was my victory. I didn't need applause or cruel revenge. I just needed everyone to see what was before them. And they saw. I walked to the door with firm steps. Each look followed me, and I felt deep in my chest that I would never be the same. Not because they had tried to destroy me, but because I had shown the world and myself that my silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. And as I closed the door behind me, I let the final phrase echo in my mind, like a seal of liberation. Kindness is not submission. It is strength that knows how to wait for the right moment to flourish. If this story resonated with you, subscribe. Because every voice that rises here is proof that Black women, mature and invisibilized, can transform pain into victory.